one relationship that we do have command of is the one with ourself. Another topic you like, self-love.
I love that topic, yep.
Maybe even the mastery of self-love, if there is such a thing. You know, I'm a big fan of this topic as well. I feel in my life, with the hand I've been dealt, I have a never-ending well. Like I wake up with a full cup, and it feels great. And I'm so grateful to the ancestors for that full cup. I don't know how it happens.
That's nice.
There's trauma all around me, but I do feel blessed in many ways. What is your journey? What is your self-love journey? What has it been?
My self-love journey actually started when I escaped from all of the abusive past, and it was just the beginning, you know, because everybody sort of has the escape scene. I'm away from the environment. It's like, roll credits. No, it's not actually how it works. So, you know, I got out of the abuse and was like, oh, I'm a hot mess. You know, I don't know how to do life normally. So, you know, part of that was just realizing that I had this whole plethora of behaviors which was really detrimental to me, whether it was cutting or, you know, hypersexuality, not using any discernment with a desensitization to fear, all kinds of things. So it started to happen where I would go into therapists who were trying to help me with this, you know, it was like Santa's bag level of trauma, where like you just keep reaching in and it's like, oh look, you got a whole house in there, like what else could be in there? It's its own world. And I kept hearing from people, you just need to love yourself, Teal. You need to learn to love yourself. And it got to the point where I was ready to pull a bazooka out of my jacket and shoot people. I was so mad. I mean, I just can't even explain the level of fury I felt, because and it's still my fury, by the way, because in the self-help field, I detest abstract concepts. I hate them. Why do I hate them? Because I don't care whether they're objectively true or not if you can't find some way to practically apply them. And it becomes a mask for when people don't actually know what the hell they're talking about. And that's what it was. I'm telling you right now. It was a lot of people who were like, oh, I love the idea of self-love, but I don't know what the hell it is. Which is why when you pin somebody down and say, okay, what does it mean to love yourself? Most people go dead silent. They can't answer you. And so it started to scare me, because I was like, all right, I understand that. I get it. I need to treat myself better. I need to love myself better. How? How do you go from hating yourself to liking yourself? How do you go from these horrific behaviors that I've got towards myself to something more beneficial? And the fact that nobody could answer me was terrifying. So I had a little meltdown, and then I had, you know, what happened that usually happens for me when I have a meltdown, which is, all right, I guess it's me then. So I thought, look, I'm on my own here. Like there's not, you know, I've not met anybody who understands what this is. And so I got to figure it out. I want to dive into the concept of love in general. What does that mean if it's applied to the self? And I came up with this idea of studying people who do love themselves, juxtaposed to people who really don't.
Did you do that? Did you actually do a study?
Oh man. It was, of course, it was not like official, but yes, I went crazy. I must have been so obnoxious during those days, because it was like, no matter what social setting.
What type of questions would you ask to determine whether someone truly loved themselves or not?
God, it was like a proper interrogation. You know, and anytime I met with somebody who exhibited, you know, these traits, I started to identify traits in people who really did love themselves, right? And anytime I felt like I was in the room with one of those people where, you know, they demonstrate a belief, you know, that was on that spectrum, it was like, all right, you've just entered the freaking courtroom, my friend. And why does that not make you feel like you're betraying everyone around you? And why does that not lead to this? And when did you start to feel that way? I mean, just, it was an interrogation, right? And what came out of that interrogation was a very clear idea about what self-love was, how to execute self-love, right? And how to get people there. And I started applying these things to myself in a very aggressive way. I love to take my own medicine. If I was a scientist, I'd totally be the one that tests on myself. So I went to town, and I was like, this is going to be my commitment.
In a way you are. I have to imagine. All of these thought practices, exercises, modalities, I know that you've done so much of them. So in a way, we all are kind of our own science experiment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So during those years, I went really, 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 really deep, applying all of these concepts to myself. And
what did you find?
It's really hard to go from self-hate to self-love, is what I found.
Can you love the part of yourself that hates yourself? Can that person get some love?
Well, that's where I went.
Okay.
So I do have to say that what shocked me is that we've got this idea before we understand the concept of resistance or protector parts within this personality spectrum that are dedicated to preserving, we could call them detrimental behaviors for our own sake. Now, before I really went down this path, like most people, I was thinking, you don't love yourself because you've just been deprived of these things. So I'm thinking, the first time that I ever put love into water, this is one of the exercises I teach people, is to put their hands around a glass of water, and for 2 minutes, they got to set a timer, because the more strong and intense your focus is, the better, and 2 minutes is pretty much the max that most people can maintain until they've really practiced. You focus loving something, whatever you love the very most. It's not really that you're doing self-love. Most people who don't love themselves can't approach love from the attitude of giving it to themselves.
They have to give it to something.
Yeah, something. Yeah. So like, let's say that you had this incredible relationship with your grandfather or grandmother. You think about that person, and you think about the way you feel towards them, and you intentionally send that energy into the water. Now, understanding that water is a keeper of memory, it's a very interesting element, because it keeps the memory, and it structurizes differently depending on what focus goes into it. So in this exercise, you then drink the water. Now, I'm thinking, I've been so deprived of self-love, like this is just it's just giving myself a resource I've never had. Oh, hell no. This is when I start to create, my own little PhD in resistance. Because when I went to drink that water, all of me was like, no, like, what is going on? So I started to ask these questions and started to see that there's a part within me, or that was really maintaining resistance to the self. And so at first, my attitude towards it was like, I've got an internal enemy. That's how most people feel when they've got parts that sabotage them, right? So it's scary. You're like, oh no, sort of feels like you've got this great white shark that's living internally, whose entire modus operandi is to ruin your life, and that goes hand in hand with this incredibly violent self-talk, I'm sitting there holding the water, for example, and the thoughts that are going on in my head are things like, God, you're such a freaking idiot,
Yeah.
And I'm like noticing this it's like a chaos, it's like a war.
Because that's what you learned. I have to imagine that's what you learned. If there wasn't this example of love right in front of your eyes, it was this other thing that was telling you the exact opposite. It was telling you all the horrible things.
And I had internalized it all. But I did what I do when I'm in the scientific mode, which is like, I get very, very curious. Yes. And curiosity is something interesting. It's funny because I've never talked about this on an interview before, but I feel like curiosity is an interesting mental state to lean back into, especially when you're in a really resistant state, because we can't really access maybe higher frequency things like approval. But curiosity, most people can in fact access. So I leaned back into the curiosity for myself and started to really want to understand these aspects of myself that I identified as these internal enemies. And I started to notice a trend when I worked with them directly, which, now I've got whole teachings around because I've never encountered anything else, which is that these aspects of self which are against you, right, are not really against you at all. And that was a revolutionary concept, the idea that self-hate can in fact be a way of protecting yourself. And when I realized how that was working within my own system, it was like, it was one of those eureka moments. Like if I had written a thesis, I would have thrown it over the balconies. I did it! I cracked a theory! You guys! I was freaking out, Because, it transformed everything. It transformed everything in terms of the way that I dealt with myself. It transformed that feeling that I had, there was no more internal enemy. There was just parts of me that I didn't understand enough to do the right thing with.
and the curiosity was like, how is this serving me? How is this serving me? That's a
Exactly.
great question
Yeah.
for us to ask.